So we're going to do a bit of nature. And we've got Hugh to do a bit of nature with us. Hugh, I'm just going to hand straight over, mate.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Can you introduce yourself?
I will do my very best. Could you please, first of all, we need to do something which is quite embarrassing and because we're very, very shy sorts of people. But could you pretend to be really, really, really excited about seeing me come onto the stage? Now, at the count of 3, I want a big cheer and a round of applause just so that you draw people in. Okay? So 1, 2, 3. You see? Fantastic. That's how it works. Have you read the title of the talk yet? Okay, so should we kill hedgehogs? Sure. Yeah. Who said yes? You fucking barbarian. Okay. Yes. So what? This is actually quite a serious talk about the ethics of wildlife conservation and something which I've discovered that the talk I brought with me on a memory stick, which I thought was my nice, short, sharp talk of about 40 minutes, is actually the 3.5-hour version one. So luckily, everybody else has dropped out of the speakers forum, and I'm going to keep on talking until Bex drags me off the stage, or you just all leave. But anyway, so generally, would you agree that we should kill hedgehogs or not? Yeah, but we're talking about hedgehogs. This is quite a specific question. If I'd wanted a conversation about deer, later. Should we kill hedgehogs? Probably no. Okay, and so I'm quite fond of hedgehogs. I started my hedgehog work. I was actually having a conversation with somebody recently. So how long have you been studying hedgehogs? And I go, I started in 1986, so it's coming up for 30 years. And I was going, oh, wait a minute. Oh, fuck. 40 years. I've spent 40 years of my life studying hedgehogs. And it all began on that little dot right at the top of the picture. I don't know if anybody knows this. It's quite a movable island. Anybody know Orkney, be able to identify that island? Okay, so that's North Ronaldsay, the most northerly of the Orkneys. And in 1974, the postman, Mr. John Tulloch, had heard a news story about the great value of reducing biocides in your garden by having animals who shall predate pests. And so, get hedgehogs was the message. And so he went and got a couple of hedgehogs from his aunt in Aberdeen and released them into his garden on this little island, which is only 5 miles long and 1 mile wide. And it released a pair of hedgehogs, and there may have been a male and a female. The one was pregnant, we don't know. And then very soon, everybody was spotting hedgehogs around the island. Now, the island is very small and very flat, which has a problem because it means that all the birds nest on the ground, and which is a problem also because hedgehogs will and can eat birds' eggs. So the conservationists on the island, the Bird Observatory, was bothered by this. The Bird Observatory was set up by the doctor because the doctor took on the posting of this island, which is the smallest practice in the country, and it was mostly of people who were already beyond help. It was known as Carlsberg Island for a long time because this one tiny island with 100 people bought more special brew than the rest of Orkney together, which is about 40 or 50,000 people. Anyway, so Carlsberg Island as it was. And so he got that posting because he wanted to set up a bird observatory, and he noticed that the increased population of hedgehogs was coinciding with a decrease in the numbers of successful breedings of ground nesting birds, in particular of the Arctic terns. So I went up there for my third-year project in 1986 to go and study hedgehogs, not realizing that 40 years later I would be standing in a field, well, 39 years later, standing in a field talking to people, again, as I've talked to people almost constantly in the last 39 years about hedgehogs. So this is where it all began. And the question was, how many hedgehogs were there on the island, and were they having an impact on the ground nesting birds? At the end of this project, the Bird Observatory was talking about, well, how do we get rid of the hedgehogs because they're clearly having an impact? And one of the options they suggested was killing the hedgehogs on the island. It's like, no. So we argued clearly against that. They didn't. They shipped a whole bunch off the island just after I left. In fact, it was the "and finally" news story for one evening's news. And it was quite, it's a big event. They shipped about 200 hedgehogs off. They boxed them up. They got the entire community out, walking the island, picking up hedgehogs, sticking them into boxes, and shipping them off to Scotland. Well, actually, some of them went as far as the Isle of Wight. Not very scientific, a bit haphazard. It wouldn't pass muster today. So I went back there in 1991 to repeat the work, see how the hedgehog population doing, and showed that the numbers of hedgehogs on the island decreased. They were still there, but actually there was a whole bunch of other problems facing the hedgehogs. And anybody been in an Arctic tern colony? Oh, you have? Yeah. So they are known as Pecci or vicious fucking bastards, depending who you're talking to on the island. These birds are beautiful and brilliant, and they fly all the way from the Antarctic to the Arctic each year. They're the most traveled bird, most traveled organism. Absolutely amazing, and they will hover above your head at some height and then dive down and attempt to impale their really sharp beak into your skull. So there's a very, very good reason when you're going out and ringing the chicks of these birds to stand next to somebody much taller than you. So I'm not a bird ringer, but I was the scribe, so I'd be going out with this. There's one bloke who was 6'8", and it was great. And there was another bloke who used to go out with his tobacco tin under his woolly hat, and you could hear occasionally tinks as the beaks hit them. Terrifying. Anyway, point is, the Arctic terns were having some of their eggs taken by hedgehogs, but the Arctic terns were bringing in far less food than they used to. The sand eels that they were bringing in from out at sea were far reduced in size and number. I know that because you can measure sand eel length by the beak length of the bird carrying them. And comparing to other studies, showed a massive reduction in the amount of food available for them. This was back in 1991. Possibly even then, subtle changes in the temperature in the North Atlantic was causing the plankton to move further offshore, which meant that the sand eels moved further away, which meant the Arctic terns had to travel further. It became one of those moments of just going, okay, this is actually the beginnings of those small little changes in the environment, which are having big ramifications. Anyway, point was, hedgehogs are part of the problem. That was a really interesting bit of wildlife work to be doing for my degree, and I then sort of put those sort of hedgehog stories to one side until 2003. And this, I mean, for me, this is like one of those really big events. 2003 was the beginning of the Uist hedgehog cull. I had provided my information to the conservationists in the outer Hebridean islands of the Uists. Hedgehogs had been introduced, 1974 again, into South Uist. They'd spread through South Uist onto Benbecula and North Uist. And as they moved across the country, they had, the bird breeding populations declined as they went. Hedgehogs were definitely part of the problem. Were they the whole problem? Who knows? I handed my information over to a person doing a feasibility study as to what to do, and then we went off and we had a baby with Zoe. That was, I should say. She did the work. I didn't do much work. But the point is, baby arrived. I wasn't paying attention to what was going on. 2003, in April, the news broke. They were beginning to cull hedgehogs. And I was like, thinking, well, this is weird, because I provided my evidence about airlifting hedgehogs. So I went up to the island as doing a piece for Radio 4 and was confronted with the message, oh, here we go, this is a green light for hedgehog cull. Death sentence for 5,000 Scottish hedgehogs. And so I went up there. The first question I asked was, why don't you just move them? Because moving them seems logical and obvious. And we were told very clearly, there's a whole bunch of journalists there, we firmly believe moving animals to the mainland would be cruel as it will cause many slow and lingering deaths. So I was then thinking, well, maybe new science has been done, something which I didn't know about was in the mix, but I started digging further, and I found that the research I had done, radio tracking hedgehogs, had been used to justify killing them. So I became grumpy. In fact, so grumpy that I put away my tape recorder and joined the campaign to stop the cull. And we did that by going out, people were rescuing the hedgehogs, shipping them back to the mainland, as opposed to killing them. What it turns out was they had looked at a piece of work I had done, radio tracking 12 hedgehogs through Devon, and these 12 hedgehogs had been babies taken into care. They were released into a brand new environment, and the end result was of my 12, 5 of them died. And they said, well, this is such a high mortality, we can't justify shipping the hedgehogs with that sort of mortality rate. But the observation was missed that none of my 5 hedgehogs suffered a slow and lingering death. All 5 of them suffered fast and violent deaths as they were run over by cars or eaten by a badger. So, anyway, I became involved with the campaign, and it became something which I was very, very involved with, trying to get people's awareness raised. And in the end, I did some, and add into the mix of this really bad communication. Not only the misinterpretation of data, but also the fact that we were told we couldn't know who was doing the cull because of the dangerous animal rights activists that were on the island. These were the dangerous animal rights activists on the island. The most dangerous thing they did was paint a banner. We were also, the journalists were all told that this horrifically scary gang of animal rights activists were a threat to life and limb, but they'd already been meeting up with the people doing the work to find out where they were going to be so there wouldn't be any big problems. And as to the secret destination where the hedgehogs would be given a lethal injection, it was that warehouse just there, but the building just behind them. So it was a nonsense. But what that set in tone was an entire change in the way communications were done, because people like me, the sort of bunny huggers, the ecologists, the mammalogists, were put in the same bracket of dangerous animal rights activists, which meant they couldn't talk to us. They couldn't have a negotiation. There couldn't be a way of actually formulating a solution because we couldn't be spoken to. And that was in the end, I wrote a paper for this in British Wildlife, and everybody agreed that the thing which was done worst in the whole US hedgehog thing was communication. Because by painting us as a polarized opposition, as opposed to a bunch of quite reasonable academics, meant that the communication broke down totally. So I ended up taking 20 of those hedgehogs from the Outer Hebrides and radio tracking them around North Ayrshires, just outside Kilwinning, and there's a big park just outside Kilwinning, which I didn't know at the time was also North Ayrshire's top dogging spot. And just as a thing, if you're a hedgehog any nocturnal researcher, and you wander around a top dogging spot with a bright torch, turning it on and off at random moments, you can send some extremely mixed messages. Anyway, so I was studying the hedgehogs there. They basically proved that they were normal hedgehogs. They weren't immortal. Some of them died, some of them didn't. It was fine. So we ended up managing to get the cull stopped. And here we go, cute photograph of a hedgehog, just because leavening this. And we got the cull stopped, and the cull hasn't restarted since, well, God, when was that? 2006, 20 years. And ridiculously, I'm still part of the technical advisory group now, working with the Scottish government, trying to solve the problem still. And the problem keeps getting worse, because one of the things that hedgehogs will do when left alone on these islands is continue to make hedgehogs. And so there are probably more hedgehogs on those islands now than there was when this whole thing started, yet over 1,000 hedgehogs were killed by the conservationists to do this. And those conservationists included the RSPB, who then very quickly forgot that they hated hedgehogs and started using them to raise money. And then I got upset with them as well. I don't get upset with people on the whole that often, but I got very upset with the RSPB. So all of this had been going on, been very tied up with this story. I was then at the European Hedgehog Research Group, because I know how to have niche levels of fun. And the European Hedgehog Research Group, the European hedgehogs, not the hedgehogs, researchers, gather together and we have a meet. We just share all the work we've been doing. And there was a visitation from New Zealand, a guy called Dr. Chris Jones. He was a conservationist in New Zealand, and he came over to do a talk about the New Zealand hedgehogs. And he was talking about, that's all done. Here we go. Killing machines, humble British hedgehog causes havoc in New Zealand. In the 1860s, colonists arrived in New Zealand, and they got to New Zealand and they went, this place is so fucking gorgeous. But you know what it's missing? And they literally wrote back as if, dear England, please send hedgehogs. And so there's this thing called acclimatization societies, which were, now we can look back on them and go, you idiots. But at the time, it was just thought, well, we'll just make the place look pretty. And there's a whole bunch of songbirds, which you wouldn't normally expect in a place like New Zealand. There's loads of wildlife in New Zealand you wouldn't expect there, because it was shipped over there deliberately to make people feel more at home. And for a long time, hedgehogs were thought to be the most benign of the terrestrial predators that have been brought over. But more recently, it's been found that they are not. And they are starting to kill the hedgehogs. So he talked about this. I did wait a minute, but we just shown you don't have to kill hedgehogs. And he said, well, you're clearly an idiot. Let's have a conversation. And we did. And in the end, he presented evidence, and I wrote an article. I could see no reason not to kill the hedgehogs on New Zealand. We could leave the hedgehogs on New Zealand, but the evidence is very clear that where the hedgehogs are present in large numbers, you end up having a massive depletion and localized extinction of the mega invertebrates and some of the reptiles, and the birds' eggs get eaten. And combined with all of the other stuff that's going on there, it was part of the problem, and they were being killed, and I can't see a reason not to kill hedgehogs. I'm very, very happy. If any of you have an absolutely brilliant brainwave which doesn't involve, couldn't we just put them in a box and send them back to England, option, please. Because the whole point of this is we don't know everything. Of course we don't. But we've looked at it. I can't see a reason not to kill those hedgehogs. Which then left me deeply confused. Because I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I'm struggling with the whole issue of the head and the heart. And my heart is very clear. I'm absolutely, completely a bunny hugger, an animal lover. I'm hoping to get in the Oxford English Dictionary with the use of the word vegan, being sort of vaguely vegan. Shorthand for hypocrite, but it's fine. And But I put together this proposal for a book, Cull of the Wild, Killing in the Name of Conservation, because all over the world, billions of organisms are killed every single year to protect other organisms that we consider to be more worthy. And that's a really big deal. Should we be going out there and killing one species to protect another species? I decided to focus just on animals because it was going to be on plants. It would make War and Peace seem like a pamphlet. And it was a really interesting exercise for me to really challenge a lot of my prejudices. So I should say, the first thing, when I've just got the commission for this book, I was at a conference and I mentioned to a bunch of other nature-writerly friends, I'm really excited about this. And every single one of them just said, well, you're brave. I go, well, no, I mean, it's really fascinating. Isn't it fascinating? It's fascinating, but you're brave. So I began to get nervous about this. How are we going to get over this? So I was realizing that I'm going to end up upsetting, actually, everyone. And because I'm going to go places that we don't really want to. And part of the reason for that is because of prejudice. Now, George, those who were here for George Marshall's talk earlier, it was interestingly touched on some of the similar themes. Because what I found very quickly is, it's self-evident. We all live within our own little bubbles, and our bubbles are self-reinforcing. In fact, they tend to direct us towards more extreme points of view because that is the way the attention economy is driven. Outrage is the motivator of attention. Attention is currency, so therefore we will be encouraged towards more outrageous things. So I thought, well, I've got to talk to people outside of my bubble, also recognizing that whilst I'm in my bubble and they're in their bubble, even if we disagree fundamentally, that edge of the bubble acts as a lens. So not only are they in a self-reinforcing bubble, but that edge of the bubble gives a distorted image of what is being seen in the other bubble, and they are seeing a distorted image in ours. So I needed to do stuff I didn't feel comfortable with and step out of it. The first word of the first draft was prejudice. Because I wanted to be entirely honest with people I was going to talk to, people who took pleasure in killing animals, that I have this bunch of feelings, this bunch of stuff in me already, and I want you to come to our conversation recognizing that you also come with those things. We believe in some fundamentally different thing. It was a challenging exercise for me. So we had questions, should we play God? I mean, that's a sort of fundamental one. Should we actually do... Actually, should we just leave it be? Or should we intervene and do stuff? Can we have hands up for leave it be? Ooh, okay. Well, that's interesting. I like this sort of, yeah. And hands up who thinks we should just go in there and kill shit. So, well, I mean, you kill, you don't kill. It's kind of a thing. So it's like being, a bit pregnant. So if we're going to intervene, what are we trying to achieve? And it's what are we trying to turn it back to some point in time when everything was okay? Because actually, there really probably isn't that opportunity, but also things continue to change. And we are idiots if we think things are going to stay exactly as they are, as we want them. I don't know, what was it going to be? 1950. How about that? When everything was sort of a bit white and a bit sort of okay and everything was fun. No, I mean, it's never going to be like that. It's going to be changing all the time. Climate change insists that it's going to be changing. And we need to find a way of working out what we're trying to achieve. Is there some sort of measure that we can do with this? Is it possible, actually, that the loss of species due to other species moving into an area is not really a problem? Why is it that we think that the extinction of a species is like the ecological crisis we should be focusing on? I spoke to one ecologist who made the very interesting observation that if you speak to most people in the world, the list of things which are most important, the loss of the lesser spotted dinglewit isn't going to register very high when compared to having access to affordable food, clean water, clean air, and a government which is unlikely to go around killing your children. So we have so much privilege to be spending so much time worrying about whether or not we should be fighting to save a particular species. Now, these are just parts of the questions I was absorbing into. I think we should fight for every single bloody thing, but also recognizing that these are not necessarily the priorities of most of the planet. I was introduced to this fantastic book, if you've not read Would You Kill a Fat Man? It's a really interesting idea. It's an introduction to the trolley problem. Are you familiar with the trolley problems? So the trolley problem, it's Americanism for a tram, a trolley, a runaway tram, runaway trolley. And the very, very basic part of this is you have a runaway tram. You've seen this meme appearing everywhere. Runaway tram is going to run over 5 people you don't know, and unless you intervene by pulling a lever, which drags the tram onto a track which will kill 1 person you don't know. So this is like, well, do we go and kill one species to save another? Who would pull the lever? Wow. Oh, okay, sorry, just for a brief moment ago, wow, I thought the green grassing's changed quite a bit there. But then again, are we just going to be doing a basic cost-benefit analysis, or are we worried about our soul? Well, you're fucked anyway. So do that again. Hands up who would pull the lever. Don't be so feeble with it. Put your hand up. Okay, the wiggle is good, but not. We're not at an auction. Yes, you at the back, you can buy the dildo. It's fine. No. Okay, so then we move on to a slightly different version of this same story. And this is where the fat man comes into it. And it's, though he, in his talks, apparently now he talks about a large man with a rucksack. Same scenario, 5 people you don't know attached to a tram track. But this time, the runaway tram is coming along, and there's a large man looking at what's unfolding. And you know, this is a thought experiment. Please don't practice this in real life. You know that if you push the large man with a rucksack onto the track, his bulk will stop the tram, killing him, but saving those 5 people. No, you don't know any of them. I mean, obviously, that makes it much more complicated or interesting, depending on who it is. And so then the question is, who would push him? Oh, that's interesting. I'm too small, darling. So we had this. So what was interesting? We got about 3 people with their hands up then. And in his book, Would You Kill a Fat Man? He said this is a really interesting exercise to do when trying to identify latent psychopathy amongst the audience. But when this is done repeatedly, most people will pull a lever because they're not a git. Most people won't push the person off the bridge. But it's exactly the same outcome, but it's just a case of not wanting to be removed. It's a bit like this thing. Do you want to eat meat? Here you go. Here's a knife. Cut it straight. You want to sort of outsource your absolute visceral part. Anyway, point is, I had a lot of fun with this research at times. I'm going to skip through this because I also realised that, as I said, the talk which I've prepared for you here is the talk I prepared for the long 3.5-hour session. So I'm skipping some things. This is also a book which is worth reading. Alex Simmons was the deputy chief vet in the UK for many years. So he's not a bunny hugger by any means, treated like animals, improving the lives of the creatures we owe, eat, and use. And he gave me a moment of... It was one of those moments when you suddenly realise you'd never asked that question, and then you end up feeling really, really, really stupid for not asked that question. And he was just observing that what we call an animal determines what we can do with it. And that is irrespective of what the animal can experience, feel, or suffer. So he used the example of Rattus navegicus, the brown rat. Brown rats are fantastically intelligent creatures. Absolutely amazing. If you tickle them, they will giggle. They will look after their young. They experience joy, they experience fear, they experience pain, they experience happiness. They're a brilliant, sentient animal. They've got all of this capacity. If you have 3 different rats, they will all experience those same things. And your domestic pet rat will experience all this delight, and if it gets ill, be taken to the vet and come to the end of its life. It may be put down humanely. But that's looked after. If this rat is called a laboratory rat, and I'm going to use the word if in a minute, and that if is doing a lot of work. If all of the guidelines and legislation are followed properly, that animal should be treated humanely and should be killed humanely. As I said, if is doing a lot of work. And there are laws protecting it, and the people who are involved with that rat can be taken to court. If, however, you give that rat the title pest, if, for example, that rat breaks into your kitchen and finds the 5-kilogram sack of organic red lentils you've just got from Infinity Foods and gnaws a hole in the corner of it, and then obviously makes some progress into that bag due to the evidence left behind, leaving the owner of that bag with the difficult decision to work out at what point do I start eating those lentils, and at what point do I... Bastard rat. I can do what the... sorry, obviously it's a personal story. I can do what the fuck I want to that rat. I can give it the most hideous poison, the rodenticides which are available. I mean, I know the rodenticides are available, give you the idea that they just get very tired and they go away and then they fall asleep and then they don't wake up again. Yeah, right, but that's just bullshit. So they suffer massive internal hemorrhaging every time they take a breath in. The various little blood vessels in their lungs rupture. And normally they would be repaired, but actually they don't. So gradually they suffer this massive internal hemorrhaging and die in agony. I can lay a trap really, really badly because I'm so pissed off with this rat in my kitchen that what will end up happening is you'll come down in the morning and find that the rat got its leg caught in the trap and dragged the trap into another room. I'm not proud of what I had to do then, but I did it. It was like, okay, I shouldn't be doing this stuff. But we can do that. There's no legislation to stop us doing it because they have been labelled a different thing. They suffer all of the same pains and fears, and they have the potential of suffering all the joys. But those factors are never really considered when we're looking at the bigger issues of conservation. Oops, we're going the wrong way. Okay, so very, very quickly, a few quick examples of stories I was looking at, and maybe just get an idea of how you feel about what was done. Lundy. Has anyone visited Lundy? Lundy is good. You live... Oh, it's so gorgeous. Lundy's so amazing. There's a little island in the Bristol Channel. It used to have the only breeding populations of both brown and black rats living together, possibly in the entire world, because the species normally outcompete each other. And it was decided that this gorgeous island in the Bristol Channel, that it was decided, the decision was made that the puffins and the Manx shearwaters were more important than the rats. Now, I don't necessarily think that's wrong, but it was never put in quite such bald terms. It was decided that the rats were not as important as the birds, which is great. They made that choice, they made that call, and they laced the island with rodenticides, which caused thousands of rats to die in agony. They still have bait boxes. When you come off the boat, you'll notice them. They've just got wax blocks in them scented with chocolate, so that they leave the rats, if they get to the island, will leave tooth marks. The results of this have been extraordinary. In the year 2000, before the project started, there were just 13 puffins on the island and 166 pairs of Manx shearwaters, and by 2023, after the poisoning had done its job, 1,200 puffin and 10,000 pairs of Manx shearwaters. These are internationally important populations of these birds. I think it was a good thing to do, but I think it would have been a better thing to do if the ethical panel determining it had included in, and sort of the cost-benefit analysis, however you want to put it, a column for suffering, because a lot of animals suffered to create this change. It's not just a case about killing one species to protect another. It's about causing suffering in one species to protect another. Red squirrels, gorgeous, gorgeous animals, red squirrels are. And I've occasionally seen red squirrels when I've visited my brother in Berlin. You know, it's really lovely to see this little thing. They are just that bit cuter than those damn Americans which came over here and have made themselves so much at home. When I was starting my ecological life, we knew that the reason that when grey squirrels moved into an area that the red squirrels disappeared was because the grey squirrels outcompeted the red squirrels. But now we understand that the grey squirrels carry a squirrel pox virus, which gives the red squirrels a horrible sort of hemorrhagic disease, and their eyes all pus up and they die horribly. So that's the reason why the red squirrels disappear. And so if you want to have red squirrels, you need to not have grey squirrels, because the grey squirrels are immune to this particular disease. And the example which I went to look at was the island of Anglesey. There's a guy there called Craig Shuttleworth who has done an amazing thing. He has brought back the red squirrel from pretty much extinction on the island to being a vibrant population by, there we go, cute little things, by killing grey squirrels. And I asked him how many. He said he reckons he'd killed around 7,000 grey squirrels by hand. So live traps out. So that he said, well, this is the most humane way and the safest way to do it. If I put poison out, it's going to kill other things. It's going to get into the food chain. The dead squirrels will be picked up by the buzzards, and the buzzards will then suffer the same sort of hemorrhagic problems that the mammals do. No, you have a live trap. The animal comes into the trap, you check the trap, and if it is a grey squirrel, you open the trap into a Hessian sack. The squirrel runs into the Hessian sack. You scruff the sack, and you deliver a swift blow to the back of the head with a priest. This was one of those moments when you're doing I was very lucky to start the week. In fact, I'm going to brag enormously. I did start the week on Radio 4, and I sat next to Robin Wall Kimmerer, and I touched her. Well, I mean, we shook hands. It's not creepy. And it was like one of my absolute proudest moments. It was wonderful. Anyway, so I mentioned this thing, so, killed 7,000 animals with a priest, assuming that the presenter of the programme was aware that a priest was a small wooden truncheon. Oh, my goodness me, that caused just this moment of absolute sort of confusion. And I think, well, my God, it's bad enough what they did with the children, but now they're killing squirrels. So, after a while, he was saying, are you trying to find out whether I was a psychopath before I started this work, or whether this work turned me into a psychopath? And he said he never enjoyed killing a single squirrel. He was only killing squirrels because of the end point, which is what he wanted, which was to see red squirrels back to the island. And he succeeded, although last year there were some squirrels found, and possibly they hitchhiked in somebody's vehicles. A lot of animals were killed quite humanely to create this. I then asked, well, are you going to spread this out to North Wales because you've done so well? And he was just like, well, you've not been listening to what I've been saying. It only works on the island because you can eradicate the squirrels on the island. If you move into North Wales, what you're doing is you're harvesting, because the squirrels are just going to keep on reproducing, and that's not a solution to the problem. You can do that because it makes you feel better. There are people up in Northumberland who have a lovely time. Kill them, kill them, kill them. And this is great, but you need to do this forever, or until such time as your energy or money run out, if you're going to do that without wiping them all out. And it becomes, well, how do you do that? Is it really feasible? And then is it actually something which we should be striving for anyway? Maybe we should just go, fuck it, we'll have a few irons of red squirrels and leave the grey squirrels be. Because actually the grey squirrels are an amazing connecting point for many people with nature, especially in urban areas. This one I think is probably one of the most easy stories, but maybe not. Let's see. If you have American mink imported by the fur industry, they had escaped in established breeding populations long before any animal rights activists released any, so don't get sucked into that debate. If you have American mink on a river, you won't have water voles. Water voles are one of the probably the fastest declining species of mammal in this country, and you can do all of the riparian management, fixing the riversides, making the waterway really gorgeous for water voles, but if you haven't killed the mink, the water voles will be eaten. So, do we kill mink? Anybody think we should? Okay, how about anybody think we shouldn't intervene and shouldn't kill mink? Okay, that's interesting. Okay, do you have a why?
Once we get into a situation where we're mitigating for the damage we've done and kind of holding other animals responsible for that damage, I think it gets a bit morally iffy.
Okay, that's I don't want to sound patronising. I was kind of there for quite a while, but the reason that there are grey squirrels on Anglesey, the reason why there are American mink in our waters is because we brought them there. So actually, we caused that problem, and it's a case of, well, do we just leave? Leave nature to take its course? It's like, well, yeah, but we've been giving nature an awful lot of work to do, or do we try and tidy up the mess we've made? And it's really difficult. And I'd say, oh, sorry, plot spoiler for Cull of the Wild. I don't have any copies of the book with me because I wasn't planning to do this talk. It is available in all good bookshops and as an Audible book. And I speak very, very fast. And one of my friends listens to it at 0.8 speed. So, do we step in and do we clear up the mess that we made? And I mean, the mink and the waterfall story is fascinating, partly because it seems like it's impossible, because these mink are amazing, they're a fantastic predator, they're all over the country, but one person, this guy, Professor Tony Martin, has shown that it is feasible. And he's taken on the idea, basically, East Anglia has almost no mink left. And he's now spreading his project across southern England. And he thinks it is feasible and reasonably feasible to remove all of the mink from mainland Britain. I asked him whether he thought, well, why don't you start with the islands, start with the Outer Hebrides? And he said, well, you couldn't do that humanely because the system works on people and volunteers. The way it works is you have live traps. He's got those traps, floating traps on the water, baited with the most amazing contraption. Those little hollow plastic golf balls with little holes all over them. He's got loads of those, and every mink he gets, well, certainly some, he's got lots now in his freezer, he will squeeze the anal glands of those dead mink and collect that odour onto cigarette filters and store them in a freezer. And he gave me one to smell out of the freezer. We wore gloves because you can't possibly touch it. You'll smell like it forever. And it was the most... Has anyone sniffed a mink's butt? Okay, just as if the opportunity presents itself. So I should point out, mink and otters are not that dissimilar as a species. Otter poo is fucking gorgeous. Really, really, if you see otter poo, have a sniff. Really, really lovely. And I mean, I don't go around sniffing feces on the whole, but just otter poo in particular is fine. But the mink stuff, it's if you... So pretend you were going away for a 2-week holiday and you thought you'd emptied out your vegetable box, but actually there was one onion left. And it just turns into that brown, sludgy sort of thing. And after that, you then stored it in your armpit while going for an interview in a really scary thing. It's got that nervous sweat with rotten onion, with everything. It's the most... So anyway, and he just said, the reason he didn't get COVID, he's sure, is because during COVID, he was squeezing minks' butts. And he stank so much that nobody came near him. Anyway, but the reason this works, the reason it seems to work is because of a really unexpected ecological phenomenon called the Ali effect. And basically what happens is when you reduce the number of mink in an area, rather than having a situation where you have a population decline and a really long tail while you try to get the last ones, what happens is they simply stop breeding. And as they stop breeding, it just means that suddenly they're not there. And so he thinks this is feasible. The reason he couldn't do this in the islands, as he said, is the humanity of it, because this system works because that trap triggers a message which goes out to everybody's mobile phone who's part of the project. They all look at their phone. Ping. His actually doesn't. His is a hunting hall, which I thought was a little distasteful. And it sends a cord where that particular trap is. Whoever's closest goes to it. If it's not a mink, then the trap is open, the animal is released, probably only in there for less than an hour. If it is a mink, you put in a sort of comb device and push it to one end and shoot it through the head with an air rifle. And it's something... So on the islands, you couldn't do this because you couldn't guarantee getting there before the minks starved or suffered. So there's a real element of, like, OK, we can do this because it works, because we can do it humanely. I didn't take him to task with the fact that he showed me this skin. That is the last rat that was ever found on South Georgia. South Georgia in the South Atlantic, another little dot in the islands. He was responsible for removing that... See, you slip into these things. He was responsible for killing all of the rats on South Georgia, where... So the whaling folk had turned up there and made their bases on the island for rendering the fat of the whales, and then the sealers had killed all the seals, and these two industries stopped. But what they left behind were the rats which came with them, and these are having a massive impact on the breeding success of many of the amazing birds down there, including some very rare albatrosses. And so there's a real project to try and get rid of them. It works on this island, quite a big island. It only worked on that island because the island is bisected. Well, actually, it's cut into about 4 different mini islands by big glaciers. And there was a real sense of urgency because these glaciers were retreating at a number of meters per week. And it was like sometime soon the island will be open and they won't be able to do the project. They did it. They killed all of these rats on the island, and now the birds are increasing in number. But to do that, they smothered the island in rodenticide. They killed them with anticoagulant poisoning. So if you were to look at a measure of the suffering of each one of those rats and then amplify it by the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of rats that were killed, I don't know how you feed that into a spreadsheet or whether it's even necessary. Do we just accept that we're going to cause all this suffering and harm and do it? Or should we be concerned about the actual pain that we're causing? I went to Orkney because why wouldn't you? And it's gorgeous. I like going back there. And there we go. That's a gratuitous photograph of standing stones and a sunset. But I went there mainly to meet Spud, who is, I think, possibly the most handsome dog that has ever existed. Yes, sorry about that for anybody. Yeah, okay, sorry. Ogley's cute, but look at that. I mean, sorry, my dog, Ogley. I mean, if my dog liked me as much as he likes my wife, then maybe we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. But clearly he's made a choice, and so sorry. Anyway, Spud is a stoat sniffing dog. Absolutely fantastic. Stoats were introduced into mainland Orkney they were first seen in 2011, so probably introduced in 2010. They think deliberately, possibly by a farmer trying to remove rabbits, or possibly by a farmer pissed off with the RSPB. There's a lot of conflict up there. And stoats are one of the most amazingly challenging animals to be confronted with in this sort of environment, because female stoats are always pregnant. When a female has given birth, the male will come to the nest and will mate with her immediately, but will also mate with all of the female kits. Now, they're too small to become pregnant, but they have delayed implantation, so they're basically wandering around ready to give birth, ready to become pregnant again. So it's a really dramatic thing. It can spread very, very fast, and they would have a catastrophic impact on the ecosystem of the Orkneys. And so they've been using snap traps, they've been using sniffer dogs, so clever. Walking into the wind, as you can see up there, that dog, I missed the actual moment because I wanted that photograph, but pushing into the wind, and then there was a kerfuffle, and he dragged his handler 20 metres back downwind, straight to, and you can't really see it, there's the little tiny 2 dried bits of stoat scat there. And that dog had been able to pick out, in amongst the tusky grass, those 2 little bits. And they were fine, they were happy. They'd killed a stoat in there. Recently, that's old poo. It's a dramatic project they're trying to do, and it has a chance of winning. So far, they've had no bycatch of any other species. It's been very carefully modelled, and the traps are vicious. So I'm really conscious. I'd actually quite like to open this up for questions. New Zealand is where a lot of our guidance has come from about these issues. They have a predator-free New Zealand by 2050 they're aiming for, to kill all of these species. One of the problems with this is that it's changed the entire language about the way people talk about and treat nature. It becomes a school game. You know, which school is going to kill the most possums on their land? It becomes something which is exciting. It becomes something which it becomes gamified. And there are psychologists worrying about how that shifts people's relationship with the natural world. But also, one of the issues which another person I interviewed pointed out was that we have a view of New Zealand which is deeply coloured by the most effective marketing tools any country has ever had at its disposal, and that is Lord of the Rings. And so we know what New Zealand looks like because we've seen... Just you wait. New Zealand is absolutely bloody gorgeous. Got a former Kiwi over there. It's just like that, just like that, just like that. And the observation he made was that what we have done to New Zealand is quite catastrophic. It's now one of the most nature-degraded countries out there. We're not quite as bad as us, but we're getting there. Because first of all, the Polynesians arrived, who became the Maori, and within 150 years they'd wiped out all of the charismatic megafauna, the moas and things like that, and done their business with the seals as well, but not as effective because they're pathetic compared to us. And we turned up and showed them how you do true extermination. And we did amazing work with the seals and the whales and the waters around the islands, but also the timber from the islands and then the minerals from the islands. And now the fact is that there's a reason why you can get apples all year long from New Zealand and all sorts of other fruit and vegetables, is because it is an absolutely intensely managed landscape. So one of the reasons New Zealand is such a case point to be concerned about is because, yes, it's vulnerable, but the vulnerability lies in large part due to the fact that it's already been massively degraded. And it's something which is that, well, the non-native species become a scapegoat. You become the sort of Nigel Farage of ecology if you're not very careful. So I met some gamekeepers. I'm going to skip over these because we want to talk, but it was a fascinating experience. And I realized that having met with some gamekeepers, that actually stepping outside my bubble was particularly valuable, especially when they were pre-warned about my prejudices. And we ended up having some really valuable and important conversations. There was one guy I spoke to, and we disagree about the bit about going out and having fun killing stuff. But in the end, we talked about all the other stuff that we worked together with. And it reminded me of the Joseph Joubert quote that a point of argument is not winning but progress. It was the idea that we could possibly move through this. And we had a constructive time, though we hit an obstacle, a fascinating obstacle, when it came to who had recorded the best version of Sibelius's Fifth Symphony. And whilst he thought that the John Barbarolo with the Halle Orchestra was the best, I pointed out that he's clearly wrong and that it's Simon Rattle with the CBSO. Anyway, point is, we both know we're completely right, and one of us is deluded, and I'm sure he will be won round eventually. Then I met up with Mike Swan. Mike Swan is a fascinating guy. He said he likes nothing better than an armed nature ramble. He shoots stuff to eat it. He loves it. I saw more wildlife on the estate he manages than I had all summer. I found that really sickening, because, yes, they manage it. He shoots stuff. And part of the reason is he spends a lot of time shooting deer, because the deer are stripping out the undergrowth and creating, hideous situations for wildlife. But it's deeply troubling and deeply complicated. And then I found this quote from Mary Colwell, who set up the Curlew campaign, and it was just thinking, this is so appropriate. Again, it reminds me of what George Marshall was saying earlier. What is winning? We need creative collaboration, not I'm right, you're wrong bickering. We need to be willing to work through our distaste of other people's views. And I really am challenged by that, but I really feel we need to learn how to do it. And my peak moment of that was an exchange on 2 consecutive days. One day on the internet with a hunter, and the next day with the chair of the Hunt Saboteurs Association. Both of them started with, "You're a bit mean." And it's like, okay, so we took it off. We chatted by messenger, and the hunter, ended up doing a review of my book, and the tweet which he put out with it read, "I really loved this book." And then I put my glasses on. And then it said, "I nearly loved this book." So it was good. It wasn't brilliant. It was close. And then it had a very similar thing with the Hunt Saboteurs Association, and they ended up promoting the book as well, disagreeing with some of the points I had made about some of the work that some of the positions taken and language used, which I found very polarizing and didn't help. And anyway, very, very quickly to end, the key point I came up with at the end with this was to steal blatantly from Rory Stewart, the former Tory minister. When he did a programme on Radio 4 all about argument and political discourse, he made this observation, which I thought was really important, and that when he started out in politics, that political discourse tended to fit a bell curve, the normal distribution curve, where you have the majority of views being largely in the mirror, and the further you went away from the sort of the middle ground, the fewer people there were. And with the arrival of outrage-generated, attention-seeking social media, that bell curve has been inverted into an empty wine glass. The middle ground remains empty because if you speak in the middle, you get shouted at by both sides, and if you or you get drawn to either of those sides. So I suppose the final and simplest message is, if you ever see an empty wine glass, fill it. Anyway, thank you very much for coming and listening to something which wasn't what we were expecting. I'm very happy to answer questions for 5 minutes until I'm dragged off stage. And happy to carry on talking outside. Anyone got any questions?
I've already spoken, so if anyone does have a question, I'm happy to pass it over. But if not, I have a question. Okay. So, firstly, what I'm about to propose is 100% thought experiment. And look, I completely understand what you were saying about the mink. I think it's a very good argument. I'm a hunt stab myself, so it was interesting watching the HSA Association comment and stuff. My question is an extension of the trolley problem.
Yep.
Around that whole thing. And what you're saying, by far the most dangerous and species on this planet is humans, right? If you worked in a lab where they produce viruses, and you had the potential to create a virus that would wipe out humankind, and 100%, this is a thought experiment, like no one wants to end up in prison for the rest of their lives, would you create that virus and would you release it to humanity?
No, because you're going to create vast amounts of pain and suffering and misery. And whilst I abhor the idea of basic, crude speciesism, we also have hierarchies of care. And I talk about this in the book, and say, absolutely, I totally object to the idea of just dismissing one species because it is a different species. However, if I've got my children playing in the road next to some other children I don't know, and there's a car coming towards them, I'll grab my kids first. Well, maybe not all of them. Of course I'd grab you first. And if my dog was in a similar situation and it was a dog somebody else I didn't know, I would grab my dog even though he prefers my wife. And so we do have hierarchies of care, and they're very natural. And I like to think I have an innate humanity in that sense, that we have a capacity to do good things. And if we wipe out humanity, no more arguments about Sibelius's Fifth Symphony either, which would be a disaster. Any more questions, or we move on? Oh, no. Okay, Shannon. Oh, Shannon.
Yeah. Can Can you talk a little bit about the badger cull?
Oh, I could, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't in the...
I'll say why as
Okay.
well, because obviously I love badgers. Most of us do. And we've had this iconic history with badgers in our culture that we love. We love them. They're part of many, many different parts of our, what makes us feel love, like hedgehogs, really.
Yeah, but
And
just not
now
as good as
recently-
hedgehogs.
No, well, maybe. Well, they do eat them, I do understand. But recently there's been an advert on TV. I can't remember what it's for, but the badger's really like grotty and it's got fleas and it's ugly and it's horrible. And the whole culture around badgers and our relationship with it has shifted. And I'm really grieving that. And I'd like to hear, what can we do? What do you think? Tell us more.
Okay, I don't think the culture has shifted in a sense, because if you look at our history of relationships with badgers, there are a bunch of nice people who love nature, love wildlife, and want to get a badger tattooed on their leg next to their hedgehog. And then there's a bunch of assholes who have persecuted and beaten, bullied, and fought with badgers for hundreds and hundreds of years. They are the next big predator. They're the ones that are going to be the target. They have been the absolute end. In terms of the badger cull, I didn't go into it in this book because it's so well trodden, the work. The badger cull is bullshit. And it is a scapegoat. Badgers being used as a scapegoat for the ridiculous dairy industry. However, when you do kill the badgers in an area, as you well know, you will end up with more hedgehogs, for example. So you could be argued you're killing for conservation. But the badger cull is bullshit, and anybody who says otherwise is an ecologically illiterate moron. Thank you. Okay.
I'm surprised you didn't watch the programme done by another musician about the whole badger kill and how he got you must have seen this, where he got this local vet to actually do the test, the TB test. The TB test, which DEFRA recommends, is completely inadequate. Do you want to say more?
Oh, I mean, no, that's why I didn't go into it, because I think it's fairly well trodden. The Brian May documentary was extremely well done. Yeah, and it's very, very simple. It is quite literally bullshit, because it's the cow's shit being spread all over the fields, which very possibly spreading the TB to the rest of the cattle herds. If I've got space, I've got books. They're all available in good bookshops, and there is a Substack, which again, didn't even bother putting up a QR code. You see, this is what comes when you're unprepared. My name is Hugh Warwick. I will pop up and talk about hedgehogs at any moment's notice, but if you search me online at Hedgehog Hugh, you will find out all sorts of information about what I do, and also a Substack account which will talk about Sibelius as well as hedgehogs, but mostly about hedgehogs. Thank you very much.
Big hand for Hugh, who just came in and talked about that. So that's amazing, brilliant. Thank you so much.